Hello. Got a few people joining, a couple of people still kind of hanging in the waiting room. Oh, Campbellton, New Brunswick. Hello. Lisa. Hi, Lisa. All right. So it is 11 o'clock here, so whatever time that is for you, wherever you are. So we're going to get started on the housekeeping portion of it. We do have some people that are registered that aren't in yet, but if they join us, that's awesome. If not, that's also okay. We do have a smaller group registered today, which, you know, for whatever reason, might have some better weather where you are because it's not great here. Or they might be at work at this point. So I know a lot of people are going back to work. All right. So welcome to today's session. Before we get started, I have to mention that housekeeping slide again. So the presentation you're about to view is the intellectual property of the Department of National Defense. Any reproduction or retransmission of the slides contained in this presentation is strictly forbidden. Some of the topics discussed in this webinar may be of a sensitive nature and not appropriate for children, so we do ask for parental discretion. So again, we are on an addiction series, so we'll be talking about stigma of addictions today and talking to people about it. So it might not be appropriate for children if you do have any around you. Please understand that people's stories are theirs alone to tell, and anything that is shared by participants in this webinar, either on camera or in the chat, is not to be discussed outside of the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing later on cafconnection.ca. Though active participation is encouraged, you may simply follow along without using the chat and or the video microphone functions if you prefer. So if you are new to here, I don't turn on the video or microphone functions for people until the end during question period, and only then if people ask specifically so they can ask a verbal question versus typing it out. I just find if everyone has their mics on, essentially people are going to forget to turn their mics off, and then we're going to hear everything that's going on in the background if you happen to have kids or pets or whatever at home. That being said, I'm going to apologize in advance if my dog starts barking at any time. He's being pretty lazy today, so he's been sleeping in the other room. So I think he's probably safe to not bark today. But the one time I said he wasn't going to bark, he did. So I learned my lesson. All right. So as I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about shattering the stigma of problematic use. So we'll be talking about all substance use as well as gambling and gaming and the stigma around that, as well as we'll be talking about, you know, this. I'll be going over those signs again a little bit quickly for you, and we'll be talking about kind of how we could approach people that we might be concerned about. At the end, I will give you a handout which has some resources for getting help if you or somebody else is engaging in problematic use. If you are new to here, my name is Lisa and I'm the health promotion specialist here at Four Wing Cold Lake. I'm going to start off with a quick poll that just asks you what your affiliation is with the CAF community. So you'll see that being shared right now. So you just have to let me know if you're a serving member, a veteran, a family member, a civilian employee, or other. And I will mention, I know some civilian employees may also be veterans, so just choose what best describes you at this time. Okay, so majority of people have answered at this time. So majority of people here are serving members. You've got a family member and a couple civilian employees as well. Okay, so in the chat box, you can let me know where you're joining from. I know that we have Moose Jaw, we have Campbellton, New Brunswick, and we have Petawawa. So where else do we have? Halifax, Gagetown, London. Okay, and is anyone else raining or is it all sunny? Because everyone so far has told me it's sunny. No? Okay, apparently I'm the only one in the rain. It's been raining for a couple days now, and it's pouring and it's cold. It feels like 7 degrees right now. I don't know. Send you some rain. I would be happy to. We needed some, but it's been a lot of rain because we're just not really used to this, and I really don't want a repeat of last summer. Last summer was all rain, pretty much. So we'll see. It'd be okay if it was raining at like 15 degrees. That would be okay, but it's 7. Although last year it snowed in June, so I mean, it's better than snow. Typical Halifax, raining, cloudy, and sunny in the last 2 hours. Of course, yes. The coast does not seem to ever know what it really wants to do. Alrighty, so let's get into the content here. Okay, so I'm just going to review with you quickly, especially anybody who hasn't been to the previous sessions. I'm going to look at the mental health continuum model when applied to addictions issues, just so that we have an idea of kind of like what we're looking at. So when you're talking about a healthy person, so somebody in the healthy zone, they would have either none or occasional or social alcohol, cannabis use, gambling, and or gaming. Okay. If you're in the reacting zone, you would have regular but controlled alcohol, cannabis use, gambling, and or gaming. And normally that's being used to cope with something that they're uncomfortable with, or that they're dealing with that's stressful, or they're grieving and they're trying to deal with it. So they're using it as a coping mechanism versus just to use it to kind of as something they enjoy. Injured would be increased alcohol, cannabis use, gambling, and or gaming. This is when it's going to be hard to control with negative consequences. And your ill would be a frequent alcohol, cannabis use, gambling, and or gaming, inability to control with severe consequences. Now, your illicit drug use, I mean, because they are illegal, they're more going to be in that injured ill zone, potentially. However, they could be in that reacting zone as well. Generally, using illicit substances wouldn't be seen as healthy because they are illegal, and so choosing to use them would not be a good choice. Okay. So the 4 C's, just to kind of remind you what we're looking for when we're looking at substance use disorders or anything that's problematic. So the 4 C's essentially of addiction would be craving. So craving that substance or gambling or gaming. Loss of control of amount of or frequency of use. So you're not able to control how often you are using or how often you're playing. Compulsion to use. So you feel that incredible urge to use or to gamble or to play games. And then using despite consequences. So there are negative consequences that are happening, but you're using despite those. You're not necessarily caring so much about those consequences at this time. Okay, so barriers to treatment. Before I show you some of them, can you type in the chat box what barriers you think exist for people who might want treatment if they are engaging in problematic use? Social stigma, loss of job, loss of opportunities, resources available in a timely manner, loss of job. Okay. So, social environment, losing friends, relationship issues. Yeah. So you're pretty much on par with essentially what we'd be looking at. So fear of consequences, or being held against you at work. So maybe you keep your job, but it'll be held against you. So fear of consequences, of course, you may be experiencing consequences anyway, but if you tell people that you have a problem, maybe you're afraid of those consequences being even worse than what you're already experiencing. Stigma. So we're going to go into what stigma is, but that's definitely a very large barrier for people. Denial. So oftentimes people are in denial of them having an issue. They think that they can control it. If you've ever kind of talked to somebody about a concern that you might have about their use, they may have denied it or become hostile or aggressive about it. And they're just not kind of ready to admit that they have an issue. And we're going to talk about the stages of change as well. Enabling of others. So and we'll talk about what enabling is, but when we enable others, we just essentially allow the problem to continue. And it's not that we do it thinking that that's going to happen. We do it with the best of intentions generally, but it is a barrier. And then not knowing where to get help as well. So we are going to talk about where we can get help. The other reasons that people listed as well are definitely other barriers to treatment. Loss of job would be a fear of consequence. And for the CAF, career repercussions are very, very high on barriers for both for problematic use as well as for mental health, reaching out for mental health. I oftentimes when I do a in-person session, I ask, what is barrier to treatment, and that's what most people will say. That's not necessarily what's going to happen, but in previous years, that would have been more likely to occur, and it is getting much better around that, right? And then, of course, people I'd also mentioned relationship issues, so there's fear consequences in your social environment, losing friends as well. Yeah, resources available in a timely manner can also be barrier to treatment. So even though that there are really great resources available for both CAF and civilian world, if you've heard of somebody who tried to access and maybe they didn't have a good experience, then you may be less likely to go try to access because you think you may have the exact same experience. Okay. So when we're talking about what stigma is, it is any attitude, belief, or behavior that discriminates against people. Now, stigma can happen for pretty much anything, but we're going to be talking specifically around stigma with problematic use. So it does impact people with lived and living experience as well as their families. So families and friends can have stigma by association. So essentially, they don't want to tell people that they have a family member that has problems with alcohol, right? Or has problems with gambling, because they feel like they're going to be stigmatized against because they are related to that person, which is really unfair, but it is how we internalize things. It affects the way people see themselves. So some people internalize the stigma that they receive. So that can really lead them to feeling ashamed and worthless. And what happens is when they receive that, they feel that way. And then when they receive even more negative attitudes toward it, it reinforces those feelings. So it's a really vicious cycle that just kind of continues to be ingrained within them. It does affect how people are treated by society. And it is one of the biggest barriers to seeking and receiving treatment. So if you see any surveys and things, CCSA actually put out a survey about barriers to treatment, and that was one of the top ones, was feeling stigmatized against. People do not want to be labeled as an addict, and we're going to be talking about stigmatizing language very soon. It is present in all levels of society, so it's not just among, colleagues, general public. It's healthcare practitioners can stigmatize against people, law enforcement workers, social workers. They are still humans, right? So they still have to be aware of stigmatizing language and behaviors, and they're not perfect. But given their occupation, they really, really need to be aware of that. Hi. Oh, hi. Thank you for joining us. Awesome. It does affect the quality and access to healthcare services. So as you can see, I mentioned it is present on all levels of society, right? So when you look at using the terms addict or abuse, studies have shown that they actually create negative opinions, which can lead to refusal of healthcare services or lower quality healthcare services, which is incredibly important, right? Because we want to make sure that people with substance use issues are still getting that proper healthcare, regardless of what people's beliefs may be. The World Health Organization has shown that alcohol and drug use disorders are among the most stigmatized conditions. Okay. So let's talk about stigmatizing language. So what are some examples of stigmatizing language that you've heard, or maybe you've said before without even being aware of it? So I mentioned addict. Addict is an example of a stigmatizing language. What would be other examples? You can put those in the chat box. Druggie, drunk, druggie, stoner. Junkie, yeah, so definitely a few different ones that we've probably heard, or maybe we've said before ourselves. So I'm going to show you kind of a comparison, and this is from the Canadian Centre for Substance Use and Addiction, and it's going to show what you say and what people hear when you say that. So I'll show you here. So the first one is, if you say abuser, a person may hear, it's my fault, okay? And I think that's a huge belief, is that people think that it's a choice to use, to have a substance use disorder or to have problematic use. And it's not necessarily that way, right? Addiction is a very real thing, and a substance use disorder is a health condition. So just like having another health condition isn't necessarily a choice, right? We might make some lifestyle decisions that increase our risk, but then when we have that health condition, we don't choose to keep it, okay? So that's one way to kind of look at it. When you think that they have a drug habit, it's my choice, okay? Because when we think of habits, right, we choose to have habits. They're hard to break, but we can break them, okay? Addict, there's no hope, right? Addict really kind of drives home the whole, I'm stuck like this, right? That's not the case for people. There is hope for recovery for sure. And drug user, or druggie as people also mentioned, I'm a criminal, right? Because if you think of people saying drug user, you're more likely to go toward illicit drug use, right? And yeah, using illicit drug use is like using illicit drugs is illegal, but we don't want people to just have that as their identity, okay? So what can you do about stigmatizing language? So we want to keep a few things in mind. First one is substance use disorder affects all walks of life. So I think that many people have this misconception of who it can affect. So you may think that it affects only those with low socioeconomic status. Maybe you've thought that those people that are homeless, right? It's not the case. It affects all walks of life, regardless of your socioeconomic status, regardless of your race or ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your religion, anything. It can affect anybody. So we have to remember that. Substance use disorder is a health condition, okay? And 1 in 10 Canadians are struggling with problematic use today. However, 83% of them have experienced barriers to recovery. That's a really large percentage that have experienced barriers. That's definitely concerning, right? We want people to get treatment, and if people are experiencing barriers, there's a less likelihood that they're going to be accessing treatment and therefore recovering. Substance use disorder can be treated successfully. Many times you would have to, have to have abstinence, right? But it can be treated successfully. You just need to have proper help and assistance. We want to treat all people with respect and dignity, and we want to use person-first language that is non-stigmatizing. Okay. So let's look at alternate language. So we're going to look at, instead of something, we're going to try something else. So I'm going to put what people would use, and I want you to put in the chat box what you might be able to use instead. So instead of saying an abuser or an addict, what could we say? Okay, so a user, someone suffering with a drug addiction, someone who is struggling. Okay, so what we'd be kind of more looking toward is person with substance use disorder. So even though if you look at, our series is called Addiction Series, and if you look at the Canadian Centre for Substance Use and Addiction, right, because addiction is a very real thing, but when we're talking about people who, are addicted to something, we're more wanting to use substance use disorder or problematic use. Okay. Yeah, so when people call it self-medication, they may be using it to cope with an issue, and that might be an individual who's calling it that. Not necessarily a positive way, because it's more kind of, it might be trying to excuse the behavior because you're self-medicating to deal with an issue that you haven't been able to deal with appropriately. Okay. All right. So drug habit. What could we use instead of drug habit? It's very similar to the first one. A tendency, okay. Okay, show you here. So regular substance use or substance use disorder. Yeah, so likes to party too much or urge. Yeah, so if it's what we would say is a drug habit, it would be regular substance use, or you would be a substance use disorder. If you're not talking about substance, you're talking about gambling or gaming, then it would be regular use or problematic use. Okay. Last one here, former or reformed addict. What would you use instead of that? Ex-user, okay. Recovered. Yeah, so that's recovered or recovering. Yeah, so that's definitely along the lines of what we're looking for. So person in recovery or person in long-term recovery. Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's move on. I'm going to show you some examples that the CCSA actually gives about if you've, if you're trying to say something to somebody about your, your concern, or if you're talking about somebody who has problematic use, here are some examples of what you might have said and what you should say instead. So this example says, you've been drinking a lot lately. Why can't you just stop? I'm concerned. Okay. So the issues there, are we saying, why can't you just stop? AKA it's a choice. You can just decide to stop whenever you want. You obviously know I'm concerned, so therefore that should be the reason that you stop. Okay. Instead, they kind of mention this. So I notice you're drinking more than usual. Have you noticed the change, or do you have any concerns? If so, is there anything I can do to help? Okay, so you're letting them know about your concern, but you're, not saying, why don't you just stop, right? We're saying, what have you been noticing some issues? Can I help you with this? Another one I put up, so there's quite a few different ones that they put in their primer, but this other one I grabbed because I've heard it before quite often. They lied. They said they were sober, but they used again. Okay. So instead of thinking it that way, think life can be difficult. Emotional pain, trauma, and changing life patterns can be challenging for a person navigating their recovery. I understand a person's pathway to well-being is often not linear, and recurrences can and do occur with some people as they work on change. Now, if we don't have a personal experience with problematic use, it might be very difficult for us to put ourselves in someone else's shoes that is trying to recover. But think of it as, if you've ever been a tobacco user, it's not easy to quit tobacco because it is nicotine's an addiction, right? You're addicted to nicotine. Most people who use nicotine actually take between 5 to 7 times to quit, okay? Because it's that difficult to quit. So we generally don't stigmatize too much. Like we can stigmatize against tobacco users, but it's more, I think, acceptable to be a smoker, less now in society. But we don't say, they lied, can't believe they're using or anything. We might if we're really frustrated. But think of it that way. If you've ever been a tobacco user, how difficult it can be, right? And why people might take it up again. So stress is a huge, huge reason why people start again for any addiction, because it is one of the things they use to cope with stress, okay? So it's not that they don't care about you. It's that they're having difficulty, and it's not an easy process. Okay, so I want to go over the stages of change quickly. Okay, so that's a really good point. That's awesome to bring up. So saying never understood being an alcoholic because alcohol makes you tired and you don't like it very much, but it's a very powerful substance. Yeah, for sure. Alcohol is definitely a very powerful substance. It makes people feel good, or makes them tired and able to sleep, and so therefore it can be really hard to overcome that, for sure. So even being able to take ourselves out of our own experiences and understand how maybe it would be affecting other people and how difficult it could be if they have problems. Okay, so the reason I'm bringing up stages of change is because if you've ever approached somebody and you want them to stop using a substance or to stop gambling or gaming as much, they may not have been ready. And so that's why I want to show you what the stages of change are in case you haven't seen them before. So the first one here, I'm just going to show you kind of how it goes, and I'll go over each section. So your pre-contemplation, your contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. And we also will be talking about relapse. So your progress would be going down, right? You're starting at the top and you're going down with progress. However, you may relapse and go back, okay? So the stages of change model is also known as the trans-theoretical model, and it is describing the process by which people do change of behavior. it is really, really well recognized for success in treating people with substance use disorders. So it is used quite often for that. So when we're looking at pre-contemplation, this is the stage where a person does not acknowledge that there is a problem behavior. They may be in denial about that. So when they look at changing that behavior, there are more cons than pros to it. So there is no reason for them to change it. They're typically not going to see their behavior as a problem, even if other people are telling them that it is. They may not have experienced any negative consequences either. Or if they have, they're going to be denying it that they're negative or denying the severity of the negativity. Okay, so if you've ever tried to talk to somebody who's in the pre-contemplation phase, they're probably not interested in hearing it. They don't want to hear about the consequences that have occurred. They don't want to hear about the advice to quit. They're not interested. Okay. Now, if somebody has moved, especially if it's gambling or alcohol, yeah, for sure, it can be definitely difficult in those circumstances. Yeah, because it's legal. Gaming can also be difficult as well because people don't often see gaming as an issue, right? Because it's a pastime. So that definitely gambling, alcohol, gaming, cannabis is also now legal as well. So those ones, when it's legal, it's really hard for people maybe to see that it could be a problem. Okay, so moving on, if you're going into contemplation, that is when a person does acknowledge that there's a problem and they're thinking about either changing, cutting down, moderating, or quitting the behavior altogether. However, at this time, they're not really yet ready completely yet, or they're unsure of how to make that change or wanting to make that change. However, they are going to be more open to receiving information from people about the possible consequences of their behavior or some advice. They may be open to learning some different strategies as well, but they're not going to commit to a specific approach or commit to making a change yet. This stage can last for a really long time. Okay, it can last for years for some people. However, if they've decided, hey, I'm going to make a change, they're going to move on to the next stage, which is great. Or they decide, I'm not, and they go back to that pre-contemplation stage. So they could go back or forth either way. Okay. So if they've decided I do want to make a change, they're going to go into that preparation phase. So this is where they're going to get ready to make that change. This is going to include a few different things. So it could include deciding the kind of change they want to make. So they want to maybe cut down, or they want to reduce harm, or they want to quit. So if you think about a tobacco user, they may choose to reduce the amount that they smoke, or they may choose to quit altogether. They're going to have to decide how to make that change. So what is that going to look like? Obtain resources. So I'm going to use tobacco users just as a simple one, but if you're a tobacco user, you may need to be looking at nicotine replacement therapy or tobacco cessation medications. Removing triggers. Now, triggers are those things that remind you of that behavior and are likely to cause a craving to do that behavior. So you do want to make sure, though, you're removing those triggers from your house, from your work setting, from your social setting, wherever possible. And you want to put support in place. So that could be social support from your friends and your family, could be a support group, it could be informing the friends or family members or colleagues that you normally drink or smoke or use drugs with, that you are planning on either reducing or quitting, and to ask them to respect that process and not to engage in that behavior around you. Now, if you've prepared, you're going to go into that action, which is where you're actually going to change the behavior. Now, action can look different for different people. So it can occur in either small, gradual steps, or it can be complete life change. It really depends on the individual and what behavior they're changing. For some people, it could also include a treatment center where trained professionals are going to be on site to support them through the early phases. And for others, if they're trying to moderate their behavior rather than quitting or abstaining, it could be very similar to their day-to-day life, but they're going to practice greater restraint, they're going to have more support, and they're going to learn how to cope with stress in alternate ways. So they're going to be focusing on stress management techniques. Now, after you've completed that action phase, which can last quite a while, it really depends on the person. Generally, it's about 6 months. Individualized, of course, but 6 months is where you're kind of going to be looking at. Once that action is kind of over, you're going to go into the maintenance phase, and that's where you're going to continue to achieve progress that you've made during the action stage. So maintenance can be really difficult because as time passes, you're not as intense about, making that change. So when you have less, intense motivation, your relapse may occur. May also have a relapse, which we'll talk about. So maintenance can also be really difficult during high periods of stress. So, if you've ever had somebody who's tried to quit something and they've started up again, you're going, well, why would you start up again? They may have experienced really intense stress, either through a life change or something's going on. Even during this time where COVID-19 is happening, that's been very stressful for some people. So it may have impacted some people's decisions to quit or to reduce their use. And then relapse. So relapse is when you return to the behavior. This does not happen for everyone. However, it is pretty common. Okay, that doesn't mean that if you've relapsed, you have no hope. As I mentioned, tobacco users take between 5 to 7 times to quit for good. Okay, but they can quit. It's just takes some time. It is important to have relapse prevention strategies in place. So remember that preparation stage. You want to also have strategies in place for relapse. So once you've had that, you've quit, what can you do to make sure that you don't start up again? So that might be specific stress management techniques. So an example would be, when I feel stressed, I'm going to go for a walk. Okay. Or if pain is a reason that you, let's say, use alcohol. So when my back is in pain, I'm going to do some light stretching, and I'll talk to my doctor about what I can do for that. Right. Probably, maybe not medication, depending on the reason, but maybe, they might have a good, recommendation for a physical activity program for your back pain or for whatever health condition maybe the reason that you've been using. So you do want to have those strategies in place. Okay. So I don't know why this slide is here, but I'm just going to show you what stigma does look like. So we talked about stigmatizing language, but I do want to mention as well, it does equate a person's identity with their substance use, so that's prejudice. It is belittling a person's value based on their substance use, and it dehumanizes a person through labels. Okay, so that's essentially what you're doing when you're stigmatizing somebody. I'm not saying you do it, but when somebody stigmatizes a person, that is essentially what they're doing to that person. Okay, so think about how it would feel if that happened to you. It wouldn't feel good. And you may have experienced stigma already in your life, whether it be for substance use or whether it be for any other reason, and it doesn't feel good. So when I've talked about enabling a little bit before as a barrier, and so enabling is those attitudes and behaviors that prevent the person from experiencing the consequences of the behavior, thereby allowing or encouraging the behavior. So those who enable are not the cause of problematic use, but they can allow someone to continue because that person is not facing the consequences. It does occur both on an individual and organizational level. As I mentioned, enablers do have the best of intentions because they're trying to, maybe they're trying to protect their buddy from getting into trouble. They're trying to avoid disruption in their friendship. They're trying to save a person from their problematic use on their own. They may also have their own attitudes toward alcohol, other drugs, gambling, or gaming, and that might be leading to them to enable a person. Examples of enabling would be rationalizing a person's behavior, believing that it can't happen to that person, so their use is not an issue, covering up by making excuses, believing that it's not your responsibility to deal with, so you're just going to look the other way, or you're just not going to follow through. So maybe you have mentioned that it is a concern to you, but you're really not going to follow through and follow up with that person. People who do engage in problematic use also self-enable because they have difficulty seeing or admitting they have an issue. So the way that they do that is by using self-defense mechanisms, essentially. So those include denying the issue, minimizing the issue, blaming others for their use, rationalizing, intellectualizing, diverting, becoming hostile, or comparing themselves to others. Okay. Now, another term I want to mention to you is harm reduction, which you may have heard of before. So harm reduction reduces the adverse health, social, and economic consequences of alcohol and or other drugs without necessarily requiring abstinence. So this can be a pretty hot topic for some people because they don't agree with harm reduction. They may say it has to be abstinence or nothing, right? So what are some examples of harm reduction that you have heard of before? And if you've joined in the series, the entire series, I have mentioned a few through the series. Okay, what is it? Naloxonol. Okay. Yeah, I only get high after this amount of time. Growing your own legal amount so you don't have to buy it. Potentially, yeah. Yeah, minimalizes the industry. However, you're still going to be using, right? So it depends if maybe you're saying that you're only going to use whatever you grow, and maybe you're saying you're only going to grow one plant. Like if we're talking about cannabis, you're only going to grow one plant, and that's all you get to have for a specific period. Maybe that's your harm reduction. Okay, so some other examples that I'll give you here is low risk drinking guidelines and lower risk cannabis use guidelines, which I did mention in those specific sessions during the series. You'd also have tips for responsible gambling and gaming, which I have also mentioned. Yeah, rationing alcohol. There you go, Rob. Perfect. Your Smart Serve or your Pro Serve training program. So depending on what province you are, you have anybody who serves alcohol needs to have either Smart Serve or Pro Serve. And that's so that they're trained to be able to cut people off. Okay. And to, make sure that people aren't driving home under the influence or what have you. So if anybody's been a bartender before, I have actually, and I've cut people off, which is interesting when you do cut people off because they try to go to all the other bartenders. So it is important to also communicate to tell the other bartenders that they are cut off. But that is a harm reduction. Policies and regulations that limit where and when alcohol is available. So your store hours, when you have policies that say how many alcohol stores or liquor stores should be in a vicinity, or how far away they should be from schools, that type of thing. I would say I've lived in a few provinces. I would say that some provinces are a little better than others on this, others not so much. Helping people learn how to recognize the signs of an overdose, right? So if somebody is going to overdose, we do want to save their life. So what are those signs and what to do when somebody does overdose? Providing clean needles and injection equipment for injection drug use. So those are those safe injection sites. That reduces the transmission of infections through needle sharing. I would say that one I've seen a lot of people that have concerns regarding safe injection sites, but it is a form of harm reduction. Helping to ensure people's basic needs are met. So that includes food, shelter, medical care. Oftentimes people say, I've seen it before with different municipalities and saying that people who are homeless can't get, subsidized homes unless they are clean. But housing is a big thing to help them on that way, on that path to recovery, right? So it's difficult to kind of flip your thinking and say we want to make sure that their basic needs are met so that they are more able to recover. Naloxone kits, yeah, that's a good one that as well for the overdosing, preventing overdoses. And substituting a safer drug for the one the person is using. So methadone for heroin is an example. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to expressing concern. So if you are concerned about somebody that is using, what can you do to express your concern? I'm not sure who here has had a conversation with somebody that they've been concerned about use before. It may have gone well, it may have gone poorly. It depends on who you are maybe approaching, as well as how you approach them, right? So there are certain ways to approach, and it can be really difficult if it's somebody that's close to you, because when somebody's close to you, you're much more emotionally charged about it. So it may be difficult for you to kind of take a step back and try to approach it in a way that is kind and caring, but also calm and rational. Okay. Yeah, safe environment, calm and quiet. Perfect. So I'm going to go over the signs first. So I'm just going to remind you guys of the signs that you would be looking for. And this could be signs for yourself as well if you're currently engaging in use. And then we're going to talk about how to have a conversation, as well as, if there's anything specific about workplace as well. So let's look at those signs again. So for people who would be concerned, we're looking for the use of substances, gambling, or gaming immediately upon awakening or while at school or work. Missing work or school, so definitely going AWOL if you're in the military. Poor academic or occupational performance, losing interest in activities they used to enjoy, spending money on substances, gambling, or gaming. So there's going to be a difference between spending some money to spending an exorbitant amount of money or money that they can't afford. Increased tolerance, so that now they're consuming more and more, or they're playing more and more. They're trying new types of substances or mixing substances in order to get, a better high, in order to feel different. They're taking risks to get and use those substances. So in previous sessions, I also mentioned people more likely to go toward criminal activity to get money to be able to afford those substances, or getting them from non-legal sources as well. Isolating from friends and family, extreme changes in behavior and mood, turning to substances, gambling, or gaming to cope with issues instead of, proper stress management techniques, having trouble remembering things or staying alert, having trouble concentrating, thinking, or making decisions, no longer hanging out with friends who don't engage in the behavior, and choosing new activities and friends based on the behavior. So there are more signs than the ones that I mentioned. These are just kind of the common ones. And keep in mind that just one of these signs doesn't necessarily mean that somebody has problematic use, but it might still warrant a conversation because there might be something else going on in their life. Okay? Now, having a conversation. So Lisa mentioned here, so we want a safe environment, calm and quiet. What else will we want to look at or either don't do or do to have a proper conversation about your concern? And this might be things that you've done before that really worked, or it might be things that if you were approached, you would like to see. Privacy, yeah. Not judging. Yeah, so approaching them during a time that they're not normally using or they're not under the influence. So yeah, finding the right time. Discretion and low tone. Yeah. Perfect. Okay, some people have some really good ideas here. So let's look at some points. So of course, the first part is showing concern. So you want to tell them that you're worried about them. That, and the reason is, you care for them. If it's a colleague that maybe you're not very close to, it might be better for somebody else to have that conversation with them, or you can still tell them that, you're concerned about their well-being or their welfare or what have you. You do say you want what's best for them, right? We aren't looking at what's best for us, we're looking at what's best for them. We want to listen. So active listening is incredibly important. What would active listening look like? Some people post in the chat about what that looks like. Ask questions as the conversation unfolds. Yeah. Pay attention and wait until the person finishes talking before interrupting. Yep. For sure, we don't want to be interrupting. That can be difficult for us. Rewording their statements after they're talking to show you understand. Yes, so definitely paraphrasing, summarizing. Be interactive with what they're saying. Yeah, we don't want to just be there and sit like a board. It's not really what's good. Okay, so we also want to make sure that we're, using eye contact, but make sure you're not fully staring at the person because that can be unnerving. So eye contact, you want to have open body language, so don't sit there with your arms crossed. Okay, so you also want to Okay, so people are not saying not interrupt them. Yeah. We want to also make sure that we're not distracted by other things. So suspend everything else around you. So you don't want to be, checking your emails while you're talking. You don't want to be using your phone. You want to make sure that you're paying attention solely on that person, because if you've ever had a conversation with somebody who's obviously not paying attention to you, you knew, right? Like I definitely know when somebody is kind of focusing on something else. Okay, so make sure that you're focusing on them. Okay. You also want to, when you're listening, you want to be listening for if there's any underlying reasons why they're engaging in that use. So there might be potential issues. So we want to be acknowledging those issues and their experiences, because that may help inform the type of help you encourage them to seek. Okay. Be patient. So a tough conversation can make someone defensive or hostile. So we don't want to rush that conversation. You want to give yourself plenty of time in that conversation, but you also may need to come back to it at another time if needed. If they are really defensive and hostile right off the get-go, it may not be the best time to talk about them. You've let them know you have a concern. Maybe revisit that when they've been able to calm down a bit. Keep an open dialogue, so telling them that you were there for them and that they can talk to you at any time. So this isn't just a one and done conversation. They can come approach you at any time and continue this conversation. Don't stigmatize. I've already mentioned this. We really, really want to be aware of our language. Even things that we think may be, harmless. Really think about what you say and how it affects people and how you would feel if somebody said it to you. Okay, be compassionate and open in how you speak to the person, because we want that person to feel understood and we want them to feel accepted. Be positive. So the reason I want to say be positive is because people can sometimes lose sight of the good things in their life and their personal strengths when they're engaging in problematic use. So we want to remind them of the good things. So remind them of friends, family, groups, activities, other things that they have enjoyed doing or they enjoyed doing before that will make getting help worthwhile to them. We also want to recognize their strengths and their ability to overcome this. So some people who are using may feel like it's hopeless. There's no way that they can quit or they can get out of this. We want to encourage them to realize that they do have strength and they are able to overcome this. They just might need a little bit of help right now. We do want to encourage them to get help as well. So you have to understand who you are in this situation. You are a person that is going and expressing your concern. You are not a healthcare practitioner, which means that you cannot diagnose it, because a substance use disorder is a medical condition that requires medical attention, okay? So you can't diagnose the issue. All of what you're supposed to be doing is encouraging them to get help, providing them with those resources. You can offer to go with them if they're hesitant to go alone. Some people might be nervous, but we don't want to, force your presence on them. If they're saying, I'd like to go myself, I'm good, fine. But then follow up to see if they did go. Talk to them again and say, have you been able to go and talk to X, Y, and Z? Okay. All right. That is the last portion of this series. I'm going to put that handout on there and do the polls. But as I put the polls out, you can think about it. If you have any questions, you can start typing them out. Here are your resources again that we put on for every session as well. So if somebody is having an issue with addiction, they can call the Canadian Forces Member Assistance Program. Family Information Line is also available. For youth, there's also the Kids Help Phone, or you can text CONNECT to 686868. As I mentioned, I'll give you that handout that also includes some other contacts that you can use if you're talking to somebody and you're expressing concern, or if you have it concerned about your own use. Okay, so first I'm going to do the polls here. So the first question here is, I feel like I can apply what I learned today in my daily living. So are you strongly disagreeing, disagreed, either agree or nor disagree, agree or strongly agree? Okay, majority of people have answered here. So majority are agreeing or strongly disagreeing, so that's fantastic. And last question here is, how satisfied are you with the Demio platform? So that is a platform that we use to provide you with this information. So extremely dissatisfied, somewhat dissatisfied, neither satisfied nor dissatisfied, somewhat satisfied, or extremely satisfied. Okay, so most people are good with it, so that's great. All right, so I'm just going to add that handout for you now so you can take a look at it. So it is just getting help with problematic use. So it has some information of where to go if you're concerned. So now I'll open it up to questions if you do have any questions. If you want to ask a question verbally, let me know. It'll turn on your mic and I can do that for you. If you don't have any questions, you can just let me know that you're good to go, just so I don't cut anybody off. Okay. Okay, so I think telling people financially to quit something works really good. Yeah, so that can also be, you know, something that you're discussing when you're expressing your concern is the financial consequences of their use, and that could be definitely a huge motivator for people. I know for when we're talking to people who are quitting tobacco, we use a calculator to see how much they're spending in a week, in a month, in a year, in 10 years, right? So that can definitely be a motivator for some people. Awesome. I'm so glad that everyone enjoyed it. Of course, we have limitations on how we can participate with you, but I'm glad that people found that they were able to still participate as much as possible in this format. So I will also put I know that most people know our Gmail by now, but I will put that in here. So if you do have any questions at any time or you want to reach out to us, please feel free. You can also reach out to your local base or wing if you have questions as well. So thank you very much for joining during this series. Yeah, so we'll also be there is going to be actually a YouTube channel coming out soon that'll have all these webinars recorded. So we're waiting a little bit on that. That should be hopefully soon. So you'll be able to kind of see all of the webinars in the past if you haven't been able to attend, or if you think that any of this series would be useful to anybody else. So thank you so much for joining either the entire series or some sessions or even just today. I really appreciated it. It was a really good group and it was really easy to be able to interact with you guys throughout this entire process. So that was fantastic. This is the end of this series. So I'm only actually presenting once more this month so far, and that'll actually be in a couple weeks. I'll be doing something on energy drinks, so you can take a look for that one. Otherwise, I'm taking a little break from series because I just finished 2 series this week. So taking a little bit of a break, but I'll probably be back at some point with some more online content if you're interested in joining me again. So thank you again. Have a great rest of your week. If I don't see you in another series again or another session, have a wonderful summer. Hopefully you get some good weather for your summer. I'm hoping we do. And thank you again. Have a great day.